This is the Honda CB650R, a middleweight naked motorcycle that was first introduced into their lineup as the CB650F back in 2014. That's 10 years ago now. But to be fair to Honda, for 2024 they've made some fairly significant updates that I think help to keep it competitive and even give it a couple of strong USPs. So is it still one to consider if you're looking for a well-priced mid-capacity naked this year? Well, in this video, we'll take it out for a spin and I'll tell you all of the pros and cons to find out. So let's talk about some of the positives on this bike first, and I think the most predominant factor has to be the fact that in this sort of affordable middleweight part of the market, it's absolutely flooded with parallel twins, and so the inline 4 in this particular bike gives it a point of distinction. And look, an inline 4, in my opinion, is the engine configuration that you'd more typically associate with either sportier bikes or perhaps more premium nakeds as well. And so for something that is ultimately built to a price, you do feel like you're getting something a little bit special. Naturally, this engine's going to rev up quite a bit more than the twin powered competition, so you can see the red line is up at around 12,500 RPM. And of course, when you do get it up to those sorts of revs, I don't know if you could hear that with the lid open, but the soundtrack is excellent. You know, it's not the loudest bike being emissions compliant in 2024, but still the fundamental sound of an inline 4 when it's revving its nuts off is always going to be a good thing in my book. One of the side effects as well of that ability to really rev out is the fact that it actually makes a really respectable peak power figure, and actually a little more than pretty much all of the competition around this price point. So it's well up over 90 horses. And yeah, you do have to get it singing to be able to access it. But once this bike's spinning up, there really is plenty of fun to be had. Yep. Plenty of power. It's got to be said as well, for what you're paying, you're getting really quite decent hardware and chassis componentry on this bike. You've got those Nissin brakes up front, 4-piston, radially mounted, so plenty up to the task for the sort of sporty naked riding you can do on a bike like this. And then also suspensions from Showa. You've got a non-adjustable fork, but it is a big piston, separate function fork. Feels quite, I would say, supportive and firm in a part of the market where quite often you do get slightly sloppy suspension fairly frequently. Decent on the shock as well, probably not up to super aggressive riding, but for the sort of all-rounder mid-naked bike that it is, I think it's appropriately set up. And honestly, I'd say the handling's really good. It's moderately sporty, not too aggressive, but still plenty of fun, and I guess right where you'd expect this sort of bike to be. Ergonomically as well, I'd say that's another thing they've got right. The seat height is moderate, pegs a little bit sporty but not super cramped, and then the bars maybe not quite as wide as some of the other nakeds this part of the market, but to have your hands a little bit narrower maybe does keep it feeling fairly sporty, and they're in a really nice spot. So for me, I'm 5'9" or 175 centimeters, and this is a very natural feeling bike for me. Now, a lot of that stuff, though, we already knew about the CB650R. I've reviewed it on a couple of occasions, and the fundamentals are very much the same, and I'd say that is very much a good thing. But there are a few tweaks for 2024, which I think have helped to just keep it up to date and keep it fresh. One of them would be the styling package, so they've slightly updated some of the bodywork to keep it a little bit sharper. I like the new headlight shape. There's a little more teardrop shape, let's say. You've got a good selection of colours as well. I like this khaki green, but there's a red if you want something a little brighter. And I'd say overall, it's a really, really nice looking bike. And I think it's the level of quality on the finish that's the most impressive about it. If you put this side by side with a Z650 from Kawasaki, an MT-07 from Yamaha, let's say even a Trident actually, a Triumph Trident, where typically Triumph's level of finish is very good, this is probably the one, and considering they're all around the same price point, that'd look the most impressive, that looks like it's worth that little bit more. Oof, I can almost sneak through that. But anyway, it gives me a chance to tell you about the other new feature, which is this dash. It's now got a TFT display, which packs a little bit of connectivity and stuff like that. And although Honda aren't necessarily the most dramatic and flamboyant when it comes to designing the interfaces on their TFT displays, it still is a massive step up from the inverted LCD display on the previous generation, which, you know, it was fine, but it was a little bit difficult to read in bright sunlight like today. And I think they acknowledged that on the last iteration of it with a little visor over the top to try and give it a bit of shade. So look, I think some people like hooking their phone up, being able to take calls and stuff like that. Other people probably couldn't care less. But what this does give everybody, no matter how you feel about the sort of very techie features, is a much more readable dash that's got great visibility in all conditions. And it can automatically adjust its brightness, so it won't be, you know, burning your eyeballs at night when you want it to be dim. But equally, like you can see in direct sun now, it's still perfectly easy to read. And I think I've probably said this before on other Hondas, but my preference is the black background, the dark layout, as opposed to the white, just because it looks a little bit stealthier, a little bit cooler. And so yeah, nice to have that customizability, along with a couple of layouts as well. Now, I won't go into absolute detail on this one, because we've got a whole separate video about whether to spec this bike or not with their e-clutch system. And basically what this allows you to do is ride it like a twist and go. So let's go down into first here. I'll indicate to pull over. No clutch, just brake, and it operates the clutch on your behalf. Same for pulling away, a little twist of the throttle. And then also the e-clutch kind of bundles in quick shifter abilities. So on the up and down shift, you can do it clutchlessly. And so yeah, for me, in terms of value for money, this feature is just £100 on top of the standard CB650R. And so I reckon it's a bit of a no-brainer, and it does give this bike a USP versus the competition, which, given that we're in that very competitive price point, you know, a techie feature like this is quite impressive for a relatively modest fee. Last one on the positives, I've got to say, you've got to probably include the price in that sort of conversation. Like I say, inline-4, some new tech, really good level of finish, really good components, a very pleasant all-round ride. And so the fact that they can deliver that for a similar price to, if not less than some of the competition, I think is really very good. Still, all bikes have their weaknesses, so is there anything about this bike that I would say isn't fantastic? Well, I think fundamentally one of the trade-offs of having that Revy inline 4 is the fact that it's not that immediately torquey. It makes similar peak torque to some of the competition like the MT-07 or the Trident, but if you put those figures side by side, you'll see that it makes it quite a lot higher in the rev range, like I say, as you'd expect for an inline 4. And for some people that might not necessarily be a bad thing, because it is very manageable and smooth, lowering the revs. But yeah, if you like a big kick when you twist the throttle down at 3, 4, 5,000 RPM, this probably isn't gonna be the bike that's gonna deliver that to you. Whereas, like I say, the MT-07, the Suzuki, and also Honda's own CB750 Hornet that's parallel twin powered will all give you a bit more of that. Then you've also got the weight as well. I mean, Honda were upfront about the fact that with the 750 Hornet, they managed to shed quite a bit of weight versus this bike, and it's just one of those things on the spec sheet that comes up a little less competitive, let's say, than some of the other fields. Out on the road, is it necessarily a heavy, cumbersome bike? Not really. I'd say it's still pretty good, but it's another factor that contributes to it being perhaps a little less snappy and lively. And if you're someone who just likes to look for the lightest bike possible, this isn't going to be it, especially if you add that e-clutch, which is another close to 3 kilograms on top. I'd also add that while the inline-4 engine is naturally quite smooth feeling, there are some fairly significant vibes through the seat and pegs in the middle of the rev range at around 4 or 5,000 RPM. Maybe not so bad that it would put me off buying one, but they were certainly more prominent
than I was expecting. Now, vibes can be a bit of a personal thing, and I guess some of that will depend on your riding style and physical makeup. But if you're thinking about buying one of these for a bit of commuting, for example, where you might be sat at a constant speed at those sort of revs, then it's worth a demo, of course, to see if they're an issue for you. Overall, though, I've got to say this is still a very classy machine that I think slightly exceeds the quality you'd expect for this price point. The build and the new looks are pretty fantastic, and it doesn't feel like any corners have been cut with the componentry. The new TFT Dash swiftly deals with one of the biggest issues on the previous gen of this bike, and also opens up some additional functionality. And then you've got a couple of really strong selling points that are specific to this bike amongst the other middleweight nakeds, like the inline-4 engine configuration, which will be a real draw for some, and the option of the e-clutch system, which you won't find anywhere else, at least for now. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. And if you want a little more detail on the e-clutch, and whether I think it's worth speccing up, then I'll put our full video on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on MOTOBOB. And massive thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.